This is the ASUS ROG Ally, which I've had for 3 months. Let me just say, the Ally fully restored my love of handhelds in a way that the Nintendo Switch never could. But yet, it still sucks a bit, and let me explain. I want to unpack that with you, as well as ask, why did I choose this over other handhelds? Why do I love a technically bad product? And how do you know if the Ally is right for you? In case this is your first video from me, hi, hello, welcome, and this is my cat. If you're new here, with each video, I kind of want to give you some relevant personal anecdotes so that you can kind of see where I'm coming from. There's enough people doing the technical gabagool thing with all the specs and the frequencies and the hertz and this and the man and that. I really like gaming and tech, so I just want that to come across in this review and also maybe get a little bit more personal so you can understand where I'm coming from. And if you don't mind then, without further ado, let's take a little trip to the past. So in terms of handhelds, the first handheld I ever loved and owned was the Game Boy Color. After that, it was the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, the DSi, the 3DS, not the 2DS. What the hell was the 2DS? The PlayStation Vita, though, was the last memorable experience that I had with a handheld. To this day, a fair amount of people still have their Vitas, or they go out and buy one because, in hindsight, the Vita is ahead of its time, and it makes a perfect pocket emulator. I think it even had like an OLED screen. I haven't owned an OLED anything. Unfortunately, though, when the PS Vita stopped getting new games, people just kind of started giving up on it. And so did I, so I sold mine, and I never looked back. I kind of wish I still had mine though, so, hindsight's 20/20. Fast forward a few years though, and Nintendo, of all people, did what Nintendo does, releasing the Nintendo Switch. I didn't get the Switch at launch, it just wasn't on my radar, but when Pokemon Sword and Shield came out, for some reason, I felt like I had to get it just to experience Pokemon like I remember when I had my Game Boy and my DS and all those really good handhelds. And yeah, Sword and Shield was not the best Pokemon to hop in with, not even the best Switch game to hop in with, but there were some other games that I really actually enjoyed. Granted, it was a good handheld, and even then, the Nintendo Switch was the console that most people, including myself, took with them on trips, to school, and anywhere that you'd have a little bit of time to game in between whatever you're doing. But after a while, the Switch aged kind of poorly. New games started running at worse frame rates and lower resolutions. I think Tears of the Kingdom kind of worked through that by using some sort of AMD FSR sort of thing, but not every game has that luxury, or not all the devs even put in all that effort. Even some of the newer releases had to forego running the game on local hardware and use the power of the cloud to stream parts of the game over for a smooth experience. That means you can't even play some of these games without a Wi-Fi connection. I mean, hello, you're not going to be constantly connected to the internet on a handheld. So if this is your main console, then what's the point almost, The nail in the coffin for me though was Persona 5. If you know me, you know I love Persona 5 and I can never shut up about it. I'll get into that in just a second, bear with me. In the last year or so that I had my Switch, this is kind of what the life cycle of it was. A cool game would come out, I would dust off my Switch, binge that game for 2 weeks, finish the game, and then put the Switch back in its stock where it would collect dust until the next game came out. The problem was, a lot less of these games were starting to come out, and if they did, well, the competition was pretty fierce. Why play Kirby when I can play Elden Ring on PS5? Why play Xenoblade when I can play God of War Ragnarok, also on PS5? But, that's what I'm trying to get at here. Nowadays, we as gamers are getting pulled in all directions at once, and it's been bittersweet, but with that new $70 price tag, we have to choose a lot more carefully now. And Persona 5 was the one game I dreamed of playing on Switch. Whenever I played that game, something about it just screamed portability and fun on the go. See, I played like 90 hours of Persona 5 on the PS3, but I never finished it. I had a console reset, just didn't work out. I kept Persona 5 in the back of my mind for years, just thinking of when I would actually replay it to finally beat it. There were rumors that Persona 5 was coming to Switch eventually, but that was just sort of a prophecy I was waiting on with no real backing. Eventually though, those rumors turned into leaks, and those leaks turned into an announcement. I was even following a Twitter account that would tweet daily updates about if Persona 5 had been announced for the Switch yet, and eventually that announcement did come out, and the Switch version was on the way. After waiting for it for so long, the day before came, and I was about to go on a trip the next day. So I made sure to go to a store where I could pick it up at first thing in the morning, and then I dusted off my Switch, packed the Switch and Persona 5. I remember being so excited. When I actually started playing, something felt off. You see, I didn't have the OLED Switch model. I was still rocking the original LCD Switch with those thick bezels and the kind of wonky screen. Even then, for some other reason, seated on the plane playing Persona 5, the game looked bad. I couldn't tell what frame rate it was running at, but it also just looked like it wasn't even running at 720p. It was running at like 500p and 30 FPS more or less, which I'm not a huge stickler for 30 versus 60 FPS. If the game looks and plays fine, I'll play it, but this game is animated, and for all intents and purposes, it doesn't have a lot going on where it shouldn't run at 60 FPS, especially at 500p. This wasn't going to fly for me, no pun intended, but for a game that looks like an anime and requires a ton of reading, somebody really screwed the pooch here. So there it is, the nail in the coffin. I never played Persona 5 on Switch past the first hour, and not even the promise of Pokemon Scarlet or Tears of the Kingdom could keep me with my Switch. I sold the Switch, and I never looked back. And to this day, I don't regret it. If I want to play a Switch game now, I'll buy the game at the store to support the developers and then come home to emulate it on my PC. I've had enough of games running at sub 720p, even sub 1080p in docked, and sub 30 FPS. Fast forward a few more years, and Valve of all companies finally decided that the Switch had gone uncontested long enough. They released a Steam Deck, and gamers all over the world pre-ordered the hell out of it. Some people waited months after release despite a day one pre-order because of how much of a demand they had. The biggest reason being, though, you can't just walk into a store and buy a Steam Deck unless you're in Japan. I was cautiously excited for the Steam Deck. Something about a new handheld with PC games is arguably pretty exciting, but I didn't get one at launch. I was skeptical and waiting to see if this thing had legs, given Valve's previous console experience. After many months in research though, just when I was about to pull the trigger on the Steam Deck, ASUS threw their hat into the ring with the ROG Ally. The best things about the Ally were that it boasted double the power of the Steam Deck, a 1080p 120Hz screen compared to the Deck's 800p 60Hz screen. And hey, the ROG Ally was available day one at Best Buy. The ROG Ally was set to release in June, and yeah, I pre-ordered it. As much as it pains to say don't pre-order things, you know how that goes, but I was excited and I just wanted to get the Best Buy at opening, pick it up, have it sit on my backpack at work until I got home, and then play it all afternoon. Since then, I've actually been using the Ally in my daily life, including taking the Ally on an 8-hour flight to Hawaii and a shorter 3-hour flight to Mexico, and a 2-hour road trip where I was passenger princess. That's a wide range of use cases, so how about we finally get into the review. How did the Ally do in these circumstances? One of the first things people loved to do with the Steam Deck was just try it out, installing all sorts of games and emulators just to see how they ran and how it felt playing them anywhere but your desk. This is a lot like what I did when I first got my ROG Ally. One of the first things I want to get into is the storage, because to install all these games and emulators, you are going to need storage. How's that on the Ally? You get 512 gigabytes of SSD storage, but mind you, these are full PC games you're installing. The PS5 showed us that nowadays, with the size of AAA games, 512 gigabytes isn't a whole lot, especially when you account for the OS. Thankfully though, ASUS made it pretty easy to open up the Ally and replace the SSD. There is also a microSD card slot at the top of the device, but, and this is a big but, the SD card issue on the Ally has been its Achilles heel. It's the most common issue that people have been having with this device. My SD card slot actually gave out halfway through that trip to Hawaii when I was in the hotel installing Assassin's Creed Unity. You're either gonna brick your SD card or the port itself. For me, it was actually the port. The SD cards work fine, but the port itself hasn't been picking up any cards since. There is a device warranty, like a manufacturer one, that you get from ASUS, so you can send them your device and have it repaired. But apparently people have been having kind of mixed results, either getting the same device with no resolution back, or something breaking immediately after. I personally don't think I'll go that far. I mean, that's really the only issue I've had with my Ally, and I've decided I don't need that many games on this thing at a time. You can fit a good amount of games, even AAAs. I mean, if you have two big AAA games at like 120 gigabytes, a couple of indies, maybe some smaller 40 gigabyte games, 70 gigabytes, and maybe, you know, some of those emulator games coming in at less than 24 gigabytes usually, you're gonna be just fine. At the end of the day, you don't need all of those games. And if you do, then maybe reconsider the Ally. The next biggest thing that you want to talk about with handheld is the battery life. The Ally can get around 2 hours of playing time if you're being careful, but that usually means running your device at a lower resolution, like 720p and 60 Hz with a 10 to 15 watt power setting. Ironically, the Steam Deck sometimes gets a little more performance out of those same presets.
Gameplay, the Steam Deck always beats out these other devices. So you can see here getting around 64 frames. So as you can see here, I'm getting around 80 FPS here.
At the absolute worst though, the ROG Ally can only get you 1 hour. Yes, 1 hour of playtime. Not great for long trips, but fine anywhere else. You can get a portable charger, but that is a whole other device. You'll also need a special type of charger with a certain output. It'll get you that 30-watt power mode that you get when you're plugged into the wall, that sort of turbo mode. For me, I actually don't usually mind the low battery time, and bear with me here, I'm not just trying to shell out to the Ally. I have my critiques, and I don't think it's perfect. I just personally don't use my Ally for more than an hour at a time when I'm actually out. And if I am out, I'm probably going to bring that portable charger with me if I plan to use it for longer. In any other case, I'll be at home or somewhere with an outlet that I can plug myself in and just game for as long as I'm around. So what about on the plane? I plugged the charger in from the beginning, even though I already had 100%, and used the battery to maintain the 100% charge instead of charging from 20 to 100. This left the power bank at actually around 50% after 2 hours, and I still had a full 100% on the Ally, so in theory, that would get me closer to 5 hours of battery life, which is pretty solid, not gonna lie. If you're okay with the little song and dance of carrying around a power bank, the cable, and keeping your Ally sort of plugged in, then maybe it's not so bad. Otherwise though, don't plan to game for more than an hour at a time, and that sounds kinda stupid when you're talking about a handheld, right? When you're not worried about your battery running out, this thing really stores. It may not be exactly double the Steam Deck's power, and in some cases the Steam Deck will still beat it, but in terms of most use cases and most games, what you're getting is really good. I can't find a better spot for this, but look at Persona 5. Look how good it actually looks. Finally, you can play a good amount of AAA games on this thing with the 1080p screen at least 30 FPS. It's all about balance. If you want to get more frames, then you probably got to lower the resolution or raise the power setting. And each one comes with its drawbacks, right? It's all a trade-off for these things, even on the Steam Deck. A lot of games, though, are using stuff like NVIDIA DLSS and AMD FSR. You can play Cyberpunk and Spider-Man at pretty good graphic settings with just these two technologies. And if you're playing indie games, forget about it. That's where the 120Hz display really shines. While we're on the display, 120Hz on a handheld is kinda wild, especially when the screen is 1080p at 7 inches, which makes it super crisp. I have to say that after seeing the OLED switch, I still love this display on the Ally. It is an OLED, but it has such a good color calibration out of the factory that it kind of feels like it does. People that own the deck and the Ally actually notice how good the difference is. There's a whole mod for the Steam Deck to even get color calibration more accurate, and it still doesn't reach the peaks of the Ally. Speaking of peaks, peak brightness on the Ally is fine. I don't notice it being bad outside, and it's great inside, but it does have a lower peak brightness than the Steam Deck, which means if you're more of a nighttime gamer, or you're gaming in a room at night with somebody else sleeping around you, it's gonna be a little brighter. So while we're talking about gaming at night, the buttons on this thing are mostly soft. Not in a bad way, but if you like clicky buttons, which I kinda do, the Ally will disappoint you. The only clicks you're gonna get on this are the start buttons on the side of the screen, the bumpers, and the back hotkey buttons. Everything else is pretty mushy. The joysticks are not Hall effect joysticks, so some people might have an issue with input delay and dead zones, but in my experience, I didn't have much of an issue. Your mileage may vary though. I did play Overwatch on this, and while it did take some adjustment, it wasn't anything crazy. I performed basically as bad as I do on PC. The stubby form of the Ally kinda works for me. The Steam Deck might be a little bit more ergonomic, especially around the grips, but it's also a fair size bigger. It wouldn't really fit in my pack at all compared to the Ally though. Real quick, just gonna mention the speakers. This thing has surprisingly good speakers. If I had to use only the Ally to play music or YouTube or whatever, I wouldn't be mad. I mean, you really have to hear it yourself to believe it. I don't think my mic can bring across the quality, but it's pretty good. It's a really weird surprise. One of the last few things I want to talk about is Windows and the RAM. This thing's running Windows 11 and it has 16 gigabytes of RAM. The Steam Deck runs a custom Linux OS called SteamOS, and that's how Valve got such a console-like feeling on the deck. It really does feel like plug and play from what I hear, whereas the ROG Ally though needed all sorts of optimizations, and you have to go onto these communities of Reddit and Discord just googling stuff all over the place, maybe trying to get it to work right. At setup, that process itself took me 2 hours, and who knows how many more hours I've put into it since launch to get stuff running after patches or any sort of weird stuff. On the bright side though, you basically get a full Windows PC here, and that means that all of the games that run on PC will in some form run on the Ally. Controlling some of these games may be different or impossible considering you don't get some of the touchpads like the deck gives you, but you do get a touchscreen, you get a right joystick to use as a mouse pointer, the right bumper being left click, and the right trigger being right click. The 16 gigabytes of RAM has never really been an issue for me, and you can even configure how much of the RAM the Ally uses to sort of make up for a lack of VRAM on this device. And yes, I did mention emulators. I don't want to go too deep as there's a little bit of controversy there, and I've already touched on it a little bit, but the Ally does emulators perfectly well. It's a Windows machine, so you get what you expect if you've emulated on Windows before. There is this thing called EmuDeck. EmuDeck was meant for the Steam Deck, as the name implies. It's been ported over to Windows, and it neatly packages most of the emulators that you'll need. Again, I don't want to dive too deep on this, but man, seeing how the Ally emulates some PS3 games on the go at the lowest power setting is an absolute treat. Also on the Ally is Xbox GamePass. Keep in mind that with your Game Pass subscription, you may only have one device play games offline. Some people like me have been having an issue where even though our desktop is connected to Wi-Fi, games won't launch unless that little box is ticked, and it's a really weird bug, and I wish Microsoft would fix it. I turned the setting back on my PC, and that was the last switch I was allowed to make. So now, I can't play Game Pass games on the Ally without Wi-Fi. That's ironic considering what I just said about the Switch cloud gaming earlier. Okay, so after all that, do I even really like the Ally? And the answer is yes. As I mentioned before, the Ally gave me a feeling of love for handheld gaming that I hadn't felt since the Vita, and that's just because of how much I appreciate the things that this device does right. The awesome display and the great performance really go hand in hand on this thing. Yeah, maybe the battery sucks, maybe the device feels a little cheap, and maybe it has issues like the SD card slot, but it really encapsulates what I like in a device and makes it into a handheld. I realize that maybe to you I sound like I'm settling, and it could be. I bought this device with my own money. I didn't get a review unit, and I'm not being bought out by anyone. I just want to make this review to let people know why I've been using it and why I like it. If you want a device that can do a lot of things really well or do everything pretty well, then maybe go with the Steam Deck. Otherwise, shop around, but I'd rather go with the Ally with a really good display and really good performance, since those are the things that matter to me most. Otherwise, the Steam Deck 2 won't be out until 2025 apparently. If you don't want to wait and you want to give the Ally the same shot I gave it to see if it gives you that same kick, then go and give it a shot. The worst thing you can do is return it to Best Buy within the 14-day period or whatever. Otherwise, if you're looking for a console that reminds you more of the Switch or even the Vita, maybe grab a Steam Deck. And even though I didn't really touch on it much, if you don't even want to play AAA games on the go, you just want to go back to playing Pokemon Red or some older games, maybe consider the line from Ambernick. I mean, I'm gonna get one myself too, I'm not gonna lie, those things look really cool, and I really want a Game Boy style handheld. At the end of the day, I think everyone needs a gaming handheld, especially if you're a gamer. The ROG Ally may not be that for you, but it is for me. Stepping away from the Ally, I just like the feeling of gaming on a handheld. I really missed a lot of these things, like not being tied to my desk, or being able to game in the car, or even just playing while my girlfriend shops at Ulta or something like that. I mean, it's all about the little things, and that's why I love the Ally. You go and get the device that you want, but this has been my experience with the Ally. That's all I have to say about the ROG Ally, so hopefully, if you don't have an Ally, then this video might have informed your decision on if you wanted to get one. And if you do have an Ally, then hopefully you love it for the same reasons I love mine, and we can all live happily ever after. Other than that, whatever you game on, well, game on. Thanks for listening, and have a good one.